Good evening. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Greenwich Selectmen Debates. My name is Joanne Stavru. I am the Chair of Voter Services. One of the League's primary goals is to empower voters by providing them with nonpartisan information. Debates are an essential part of educating voters so they can actively participate in the electoral process. We would like to thank all of our participants tonight for agreeing to debate. Before we begin, I would like to mention upcoming debates. On Tuesday, October 15th, we are co-sponsoring a forum with the Greenwich PTA Council for the Board of Education candidates at Central Middle School from 7 to 9 p.m. On Wednesday, October 30th, we have planned a debate for candidates for tax collector at Greenwich Town Hall from 7 to 8 p.m. Unfortunately, the debate for candidates for the town clerk cannot take place. On November 1st, we are coordinating a debate with the candidates for Selectmen and the We the People team of Greenwich High School. It is student-run. The students organize, come up with questions, and provide timers. Last year, over 500 students attended a similar event. Unfortunately, this debate is not open to the public, but I can assure you it is very encouraging and exciting to see how curious and engaged young people are in politics. Again, I would like to thank all of the Selectmen candidates for agreeing to participate and giving our students the opportunity to see live how a democracy works. Every year, our league produces a voter's guide, which is a reliable resource to our voters and an incredible effort by so many of our volunteers. I have to mention Kath Bergweger, Yara Burnett, Marla Laney, Kathy Steele, and Sandy Waters, our new president. The guide is expected to be available on October 31st at Greenwich time and on our website about the same time, lwvg.org. This year, we are also doing a digital version of the voter guide for the RTM. There are 250 candidates for 230 seats on the RTM. This electronic-only guide will feature responses by candidates, including their biographies, photo, and answers to a couple of questions on their plans if elected or re-elected. As always, the League prints answers as they are received from the candidates. No editing of responses ever takes place. I encourage you to join the League if you have not already done so, and please remember to vote on November 5th. I would also like to thank GCTV Channel 79, Drew Marzullo and his team tonight for streaming the debate live. This auditorium is not wired for this, which is incredible, but it isn't, so it was a challenge for them. Now, I would like to introduce our moderator, Kay Maxwell. Kay is a former president of the National League of Women Voters and the Connecticut League. We are honored to have her. She will introduce the candidates and explain the cumulative time format.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I guess the last time I was here moderating a debate was last year for the state senate, and we did that at Town Hall when we had the fire marshal arrive because there were so many folks there. So it's wonderful to see a large turnout in this wonderful space, and we do thank you all for coming. Our purpose this evening is to provide you with an opportunity to hear the candidates' views on issues facing Greenwich. The first debate will be between the two candidates for First Selectman, and the second debate will be between the two candidates for Selectman. As was mentioned, Channel 79 is broadcasting this debate live. So we would really appreciate it if everyone could remain seated during the two debates. And of course, especially, please, please, please turn off your cell phones so that we don't have interruptions during the course of the debate. The format that we're using for tonight's debate is designed to allow the candidates time to discuss the issues. The only rule is that the total time used by each candidate by the conclusion of the debate be approximately the same. I will be posing the questions which have come from the League and audience members, so if you wish to pose a question, please write it clearly on the index cards that are provided. They'll be picked up by ushers and screened by a committee for appropriateness. Since this is a debate between candidates for local office, questions should address local issues. And please address your questions to both candidates. The candidates are not going to be restricted to 1 or 2 minute responses. Instead, they can spend as little or as much time as they feel is appropriate to discuss each issue. Our goal is to encourage debate. They'll take turns being the first to answer a question, and following the question period, each candidate will make a 2-minute closing. Members of the League are serving as timers for the debates and will keep the candidates and me informed of the time expended. If a serious imbalance in time occurs during the course of the debate, I will call it to their attention and see that it's corrected. I would also very much like to request that there be no applause or other demonstration of support or opposition. It's simply that we don't have a great deal of time available to us this evening, and so it's important to use all of it to hear from the candidates themselves. And again, last but not least, please check to be sure that any electronic devices are turned off. And so, to the debate. It's my pleasure to introduce the candidates for First Selectman. To my immediate right is Republican Fred Camillo, and to his right, Democrat Jill Oberlander. Yes, you may applaud. Okay, the first candidate to respond will be Fred, and the first question is, how will you protect the town's interest in negotiating for a new train station?
Well, thank you, and thank you for the question. It's great to be here. Thank you to the League. Thank you all for showing up tonight. It's great to be back in my alma mater, although when I went here, we'd be sitting in the parking lot because this beautiful building wasn't here then. How would I lead on the train station, the Ashworth property? You know, I have a downtown vision of connecting the Greenwich Avenue to the waterfront, and that actually fits right in with it. I love what they're proposing. You know, it certainly won't end up that way. Everything starts out one way and ends up another, but certainly it's a great idea to make that the best transportation hub between New York and Boston. But here there are two issues. One is the air rights over 1 and 2 Greenwich Plaza, dating back from 1967. And of course, the transformation of the Railroad Plaza over the train station on Railroad Avenue. I would decouple both of them. The air rights are way too valuable to give up. But that doesn't mean, you know, that I would say, you know, no deal. The Ashforths are a good family. They've been here for 125 years. They've been great partners in our community. I would work with them. So if whatever they put in on the railroad station side, any public benefit value, whether that's $6 million, $7 million, $8 million, I want to work with them either paying them or through a tax abatement to make them whole, because you really want to encourage them to do something. They're going to have to do something there anyway. Those buildings are tired, and they know that. But I said right now they won't do any public benefit value, like a park there or a beautiful stairway going up to the train station. I would work to make that happen, but I would not give up the air rights. They're way too valuable. I know we all know the reasons why they want to make this trade and get the air rights there. And as we get closer to 2057, you know, it's harder for them with their leases there, and certainly we're getting diminished taxes coming back from them as we get closer to that. But we could extend the lease. I know they want to put this to bed and certainly and wrap it up, but we're in a position of strength right now. We don't have to do anything, so we could be a good partner, but we will, under a Camillo administration, we would hold strong on that and not give up the air rights.
Ms. Oberlander? Again, ladies and gentlemen, please. Ms. Oberlander? Same question.
Thank you. My name is Jill Oberlander, and I'm running for first selectman. I'd like to start by thanking the League for organizing this debate, thanking our moderator, my opponent, and all of you for coming out tonight. Since it is my first opening remarks, I'd just like to give a brief introduction. I moved here 13 years ago to raise...
Excuse me, Jill, but we aren't having opening statements, so we'll just start with the question,
Fine.
which relates to the
So
train station.
the question was, how would you negotiate the new train station deal? I am a lawyer by training. I have over a decade of municipal government experience in New York and over a decade of elected leadership here in Greenwich. And while I was working as a lawyer, I worked on issues of economic development. I worked for the MTA. I love trains and transportation, and I'm a contract negotiator. I've dealt with procurement, all of the issues that came into play in this development deal. On Railroad Plaza, I was very glad to see that the First Selectman put a pause on this deal. It was negotiated by the First Selectman's office without enough input from the community, a closed-door deal, and that would not happen under my administration. It became apparent when I heard of it that we needed to get expert development counsel, someone who's used to doing economic development for the region. When it was presented to the BET raised numerous questions about the valuation. So there are a couple of things that I would do going forward. First of all, I believe that something should be done, and I agree with my opponent that the developer has been a good partner. They're doing what they should do, negotiating their best deal. The town needs to negotiate our best deal. In order to do that, we need more information. We need to get expert advice on the valuation, so that we can be comfortable that the sale of the air rights is appropriately valued. I will ask the BET to work with us and find funding to hire those experts. I'll also put together a committee, representatives from the RTM, the BET, the Planning and Zoning Department, to work with our town departments, Public Works, parking, traffic, to deal with all of the issues involved with this kind of development project. We deserve the most magnificent gateway to Greenwich, one that does connect our Greenwich Avenue, I'm calling it the cultural corridor, from the top of the avenue with the new library and the galleries down to the new Bruce, with the art galleries in between. This train station plaza development should incorporate all of that, and I would like the community to work from the bottom up, openly and transparently, to reach that deal. When it comes to negotiations with the developer, I will bring all of my legal skills and economic development expertise to the table, and we will reach a deal that the community will be proud of. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Do you have something to add?
No, I think we're basically in agreement on that. I will say this, with all due respect, the deal, the administration wasn't done in secret. It was brought to the Board of Selectmen last year. All three selectmen were aware of this. So while I disagree with the air rights component of it, and certainly would be a defender of the taxpayer here, I don't want to be that guy in 2057 that they said, well, who signed away these rights? It was not done in secret. The first selectman was certainly dealing in good faith and alerted and had the Board of Selectmen aware of this last year.
Go ahead.
Yes, there were a large number of community members who had not heard a thing about the deal until it was announced in July. So I guess that depends on who's on the inside track. Thank you.
Well, with all due respect, your running mate, I don't know if you're talking to him, but he should have told you that he was aware of it last year.
Are you ready for the next question?
I'm going to respond to that, actually.
Go ahead.
Yes, my running mate and another BET member made the suggestion that we actually retain development professionals to help value the property and to give us expert advice. They met with several developers. The developers made proposals. They were submitted to the First Selectman's office, and the First Selectman's office declined to move on them.
Next question. And Ms. Oberlander, you're first to respond. The Parking Services Department has been under review for a few years. What plans, if any, do you have to deal with the issues?
Yes, thank you for the question. Parking services, one that I expect many of you are familiar with. I certainly am. The parking department has had a series of mismanagements going back over a decade. A couple of audits repeatedly finding financial controls had not been put into place. It got so bad that the BET had to retain a forensic auditor to determine what the magnitude of losses were. The forensic auditor came in and documented that there was somewhere around 7 figures of funds that couldn't be accounted for, funds that were not collected out, and they were not collected outside of policy. However, there were no records, so they couldn't account for them or bring any kind of criminal case. The Parking Services Department has moved around. The director was eliminated, actually, and the town is facing a lawsuit regarding that. It has been placed on hold, and there's been a lack of management. That's something that won't happen under my administration. I believe in active management. We'll take a close look at parking services. It's now under the police department to determine whether they're able to manage both everything we need to do, whether it be inventory, planning, strategic planning. We're not doing any strategic planning on parking, collection of revenue, management of permits, a number of issues that are not being performed well. It's one of the places where I think we have to do something differently. We haven't been doing something differently for the last 10 years, and it's about time.
Mr. Camillo?
Thank you, and I would agree with that. I would look at, on day one, all of our departments and look where we can restructure and change some things. The parking department has had some issues over the last 10 years, and that may be one real good candidate to outsource that department. Atlanta, Georgia, and a few other municipalities have done that, and so far they like what they've done there. So while we have, I believe, a great workforce here in the town of Greenwich, that department has had some issues, and you don't want to keep making the same mistakes. I understand it's stabilizing a little bit, but I want to take a fresh look on day one and see if we can outsource it and have come with a much better result and restore the confidence in that department. That will be done.
Anything else on that topic? All right. Next question, and Mr. Camillo, you're first to respond. The Weeks Marina project to place a mooring near Old Greenwich appears dead at this time. However, it can easily return, period. What steps, if any, can you take to protect our environment as first selectman?
Thank you for the question. My opponent and I were both there the other night. I got off the phone again for the second time with Sue Bailey at the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection today. It's in the pre-application stage. They have withdrawn to be on the agenda, but it's not completely dead yet. Deep told me today that they are going to work with them to see if there's a viable alternative that's agreeable to everybody. But as I've said and sent a couple letters and made some calls and talked to constituents around the town, we can't take our foot off the pedal or an eye off the ball on this one, because it's still going to be there. And so whether they look at one of the alternatives that was thrown out there the other night, I will say Deep was there. They heard all our objections to it, which were many, and I think really valid. And we will stay on top of that, because it really can't go there for many, many reasons. It's not just property values, but it's aquatic life and it's public safety. We've had a couple barges break loose there, one in 2014 and one in 2000, and that's just one of many issues there. So, and they've heard that, they're aware of it, and they're taken into consideration. But I certainly, for one, will stay on top of it.
Ms. Oberlander?
Thank you. I'd like to thank actually the community leaders that were instrumental in generating support from the community at the hearing in Stamford. It is critical for the community to continue to stay engaged. I did have communication both with the representative from Deep there and the representative from the company, and it made recommendations as well to the community leaders. We need to build a record. We need to build a record about both the recreational uses as well as the commercial uses on our side that would be impacted by any placement of a mooring in that place. And we do need to stay vigilant and show up. There are a couple of places in the process where Greenwich can make their voice heard, and we need to make sure that we're staying on top of it. So thank you to all of you who are communicating with us and working with us. I'll be working with our elected representatives, whether it be Mr. Camillo or Mr. Meskers, Alex Bergstein, who reached out to the governor on this as well. As long as we're all working together on the same page, we should be able to make our best case. This is not a place for a commercial enterprise in our recreational waters. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Ms. Oberlander, you're first to respond to this next question. There were a couple of questions generally relating to climate change, and you touched on that in talking about the marina. But are there other things that the town can do in dealing with the effects of climate change, and do you have any plans in that regard?
Thank you for the question. The BET, under my leadership, funded the first studies to deal with sea level rise arising from climate change. It wasn't the first time it was presented, but it was the first time that it was approved. So when we had the controlling votes, the BET Democrats did approve putting the study into place, which allows us to plan. Greenwich needs to move itself back ahead of the curve. We've taken the approach where we're not active enough. We need to be in a proactive government. We need to be a proactive government on environmental issues and on climate change issues. We started to look at sea level rise. Why is it important? Our infrastructure is on the waterfront. If we don't plan in advance, we will find ourselves behind the curve and addressing problems from behind, and we want to be able to be ahead of the curve. So I will be working on environmental issues very strongly as part of my platform, the 3 E's, the economy, education, and the environment, to make sure that we're doing appropriate planning to address all of our environmental challenges.
Mr. Camillo?
Thank you. Yes, it's something that I've voted on in Hartford, voting for things like the Long Island Blue Plan, and certainly locally with a plan to form an enhancement and sustainability committee. That will be a committee in action, not name. And certainly environmental policy, aesthetics, and quality of life issues will be a part of that. We do have to lead. I want to make Greenwich the envy of the state when it comes to environmental policy and climate change, and fits into that. But it's the overall thing, issue of the environment, which encompasses climate change. And I think we can be a leader again, just like we were in 1989 when I and a few of my competitors in the hauling business, waste disposal, recycling, we started Greenwich Recycling, which sets the standard for recycling in Connecticut. We were a leader there. We actually implemented a voluntary mixed paper program in 1991 and led the league every year in Connecticut on that. So we should be that town that they look to. We don't want to chase anybody else. We want to be a leader. And under a Camillo administration, we will be.
Any other? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I don't often get to use my lines twice, so I'm going to say I hear your committee and I raise you a plan like I did at the Environmental Forum. I'm so pleased I get to use it twice. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. The environment is critical for health and safety. We need to make sure we're protecting our growing children, that we are allowing open space to exist as it is, and cleaning our sound. I'm also a swimmer, so I like to swim in the clean water. All of these issues become critically important. We need a plan, not just a committee. We need to have measurable goals, which I will implement. We'll be working with our environmental staff and the grassroots organizations that are already doing so much to start to work to see real measurable change, to implement energy efficiency measures in our public buildings, to do waste reduction, and to do other kinds of environmental programs that are easy to implement, because we can do that as a community. That's what young families want. That's what I want for my children, and I want to be able to do that for your families as well.
Yes, and again, I'll repeat, these would be committees in action, not a name. Okay, we're not going to study things to death. When I was on the Parks Board, I was chairman many years ago, and we were the ones back then who did a plan for all of our parks there, and I'm very proud of that. Byron Park today, if you look back at our master plan for that, it looks pretty close to what is there right now. Certainly, and the the environment, I've been involved with this, for close to 40 years locally, and the environment's been a part of it. But I'm not there, and I've been on all these fields for more than 40 years. When I say I'm going to be there for the health of everybody, it's not just one segment. Of course children are going to be part of that. But the elderly, middle-aged, animals, everybody. I'm not going to sit here tonight and single out, well, I'm going to be there to protect this group or that group. It's everybody. You're a leader for the whole town.
Anything else? Okay, next question. Mr. Camillo, you're first to respond. Do you support the plan to add senior housing at Armstrong Court? Please explain your views.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very familiar with that plan. I work very closely with the Housing Authority. My grandma Camillo lived in Armstrong Court, so I spent many nights there growing up. What Sam Romeo and the board has done there is just amazing. They've put more units there than, God, in the last 30 years, maybe more. They've been very, very receptive to ideas. Every time I've picked up the phone with an idea, they've met with me. Just 2 weeks ago, I met with the domestic violence advocates, and I went to them and asked if they would put aside 2 units in those Armstrong Court, possibly, and for domestic violence victims who need a place to stay right away, and they loved the idea, and they reached out to the police department. I absolutely support it. It's going to be really nice. They've, not only the new units, but they're redoing the other ones, just like they've done in other other areas, like at Adams Gardens. And I can't speak highly enough about what they've done there. And even with the proposed units at McKinney Terrace, they've done a really good job, and I support their mission.
Ms. Oberlander?
Thank you. There are 2 issues raised here, both as senior housing and also affordable housing, both of which the town has issues with. On seniors, I hear across town, it is a concern. People want to be able to stay in their community, and they need to be able to downsize. We need to find solutions for our seniors that will allow them to stay in the community that they have raised their families in and have their networks in. Critically important. Same thing with affordable housing, workforce housing. We need to develop more workforce housing so that our teachers, our police officers, firefighters, new families can all move into town. Both of these issues are critically important throughout the town and need to be looked at very, very carefully. I will be a strong advocate for developing both types of housing.
Anything else?
Well, I'll add one thing, that when I was in Hartford, I put a bill in to allow seniors to rent out part of their house efficiency apartments to first, new firemen, policemen, or teachers, and have it counted towards that 10% requirement for housing. And even though the Housing Committee loved the idea, they will never, ever vote for suburban ideas, unfortunately. But certainly I would, as first selectman, meet with the Greenwich delegation before the beginning of each session and ask them to submit some bills, and that would be one of them concerning workforce housing.
Anything else? Okay. Ms. Oberlander, I think you're first to respond now. How will you evaluate, what criteria will you use for judging public-private partnerships?
Thank you. Public-private partnerships, we have so many of them in town, actually, too many to mention and get all of them. The library, the Bruce Museum, GEMS, Kids in Crisis, Junior League, Greenwich Athletic Foundation, a number of arts organizations, Botanical Center. They're all critical parts of our community, and I thank all of the volunteers and dedicated members who make such a difference in our community. I think actually this is one of the big differences between myself and my opponent. He's indicated that public-private partnerships have to be a part of every project that the town approves. I think public-private partnerships are fantastic. I do support them. I will encourage them, but I believe that they are supplementary to government. Government needs to be the primary seat at the table. There needs to be accountability and transparency. We can't outsource government. Specifically on having the public-private partnerships, that proposal to be a participant in every project, that's great for the big, sexy projects. But what do we do about the sewers? Who's going to participate in our sewers other than the taxpayers? And other smaller projects. We need to have some common ground there.
Mr. Camillo?
Thank you. Yes, just one small correction. I said that I would ask that every project proposal that's appropriate be accompanied by a P3. There are many different types of public-private partnerships, whether they're lease P3s, concession P3s, or just a naming right P3, which is pretty straightforward and easy. But we absolutely have to do that. Maybe there is a little bit of difference here in our philosophy. I believe in government, but I believe in small government. You don't want more government than you need, because if you get a government that's too big to give you everything, what's the old saying? It could also take it away. I would look. There's 169 municipalities in the state of Connecticut. Most of them would love to be in Greenwich's position, to have citizens and groups like the Greenwich Athletic Foundation, which I work with, open and asking us and almost begging us to get involved with these things. Yes, when I was chair of the Parks Board, we did the Bentheim Center over there in Western Greenwich Civic Center. We've done many of them, but they take too long, and we haven't done enough of them. And yes, I give the sewer example all the time, right? No one's going to pay to have their name on a sewer, right? A sewer project. At least I hope not. But there are lots of things that it's appropriate for. So of course that if you have a P3 that has the town owning the property and we're leasing it out, right? There's going to be a risk and reward assessment there, especially by the private partners. So absolutely, but I would put in place people that are really equipped to deal with these things. But yes, I would move ahead full speed with that and make sure it's transparent and open. But we have to take advantage of what we have here in town, where a lot of towns really, unfortunately, are not availed to that.
So transparency, openness, accountability, those are all critical issues in evaluating public-private partnerships. We want to make sure, particularly if you're going down that road, that there's an open process, that everybody gets a chance to have their name on whatever opportunity there is, good or bad, and that it's not done in a closed-door deal, that there is full and open access. In addition, there's a big difference between public-private partnerships with private for-profit entities and for not-for-profits, and we need to be very careful on how we implement this. So it does require a real close look and really well-defined strategy.
Okay, next question, and Mr. Camillo, you're first. What are your thoughts on the town's new, and I believe the word is audit charter? Do you know? Does that make any sense? Okay. I'm going to ask the screening committee to come and double check that question so that we get it right. Okay. The Dorothy Hamill rink is in disrepair. What are your plans to repair or rebuild the rink?
P3. I'm old enough to remember the Dorothy Hamill skating rink when it wasn't the Dorothy Hamill rink. In 1972, my Aunt Rosie used to take me there every Wednesday to skate, and it was just a hockey rink with boards, And little by little, they did it piecemeal. And unfortunately, when you do something piecemeal, it turns out not to be a state-of-the-art facility. And it's not just Dorothy Hamill. Unfortunately, there's lots of our Parks and Rec department is phenomenal. They do a great job. But that has nothing to do with them. We've made some mistakes over the years with our facilities, whether it's there or Cardinal Stadium. It's not well lit. It's not one of the nicer stadiums. We need to fix that. And I've been in almost every stadium in Fairfield County and lots of the rinks, and we are behind. We are behind. Years ago, when I was on the baseball boards and some other in coaching, we were awarded a state tournament for baseball. And guess what? We had to play our games in Stamford at Cabetta Stadium. That's embarrassing. And we're better than that. And certainly I would look to public-private partnerships to get that done.
Ms. Oberlander?
Mr. Camillo and I agree that we are behind, that we have not done a great job at investing in our infrastructure needs. Dorothy Hamill, yes, it's on slated for study. Actually, not one of the studies that Mr. Camillo thinks is just going to be an endless study, I hope, but a study that is going to lead us to a beautiful new ice rink. I don't want to rely on a public-private partnership to make sure that happens. I think it would be great if we have some supplementary funds. Any donors in the audience, that would be terrific, but I want government to fund that. I want the town to, and I will lead a discussion on priorities, particularly on the infrastructure that we have not gotten to. 30 years is a long time to talk about things and not do things. We have schools that are in disrepair. 30 years after the ADA, we have schools that are not accessible. Greenwich is better than that. It is a difficult conversation. What we need to do is have the conversation about the needs and the priorities and then figure out how do we get that done. It's a key part of my platform. I'm going to be pushing for that conversation. We started it on the BET, having an open dialogue with RTM members and community members about financing structure, about needs as well, and I'm going to continue that dialogue as your first selectman.
I think that my opponent just stated again one of the big differences between us. I do not want government funding everything. I don't. We are going to be, our peer towns are West Hartford and Fairfield. West Hartford has a mill rate of over 38, Fairfield 25. We're a little over 11. We're going to get there to 38 pretty quickly if you're relying on government to do everything. Once again, I would look to public-private partnership. I'm going to keep saying it until you're sick of hearing it. We have to do that. Next year's revaluations, I have fear they're going to come in with a little bit less revenue and with a shift towards from the backcountry to downtown. Where is this money going to come from? We're throwing around hundreds of millions here and millions there. I believe in government, but I believe in good government and small government. And government, yes, where it needs to be involved, but here we have a gift. And we're not taking advantage of it. So there is a big difference there.
Yeah. Sometimes if you're a homeowner, you live in a house, you put your clutter on the counter, you patch your leak, you don't notice it so much, and you get another leak, 10 years go by, you don't notice any of it because you're living in your house. But your neighbors are investing in their homes, and they're painting them and they're fixing them up. And one day, somebody drives by and you say, look at my house, it looks great, doesn't it? And they go to the next door neighbor and they say, this house looks great. You don't realize that you've fallen behind until you take a step outside of your environment and see what others are doing. Government, in Greenwich government in particular, Greenwich is a great place to live. We need to bring ourselves back ahead of the curve. We need to fix our infrastructure. We need to have that community dialogue about how we invest in our schools and how we get the buildings that have been waiting for repair for way too long repaired so that our new families won't drive past Greenwich to the Westports and the Wiltons and the Darians, the ones who have invested in their infrastructure. We need to do that not just because it's the right thing to do for our community and our children and our schools. We need to do that for our property values. If we don't invest in our infrastructure, those families will pass us by.
Okay, next question, and I've had, the word was audit, but I've had some explanation from the BET Audit Committee determined it needed to clarify the expectation of objective and independent internal audits. Do you agree with this approach and the need for the clarification? And Ms. Oberlander, you're first to respond.
Since I was a member of the audit committee, yes, I do. I think it is critically important that taxpayers know where their money is going, and the audit function needs to be free from interference. I can say from my personal experience that it wasn't like that, and that was the main reason why we changed the audit charter to reinforce the independence of the internal auditor. I actually think we need 2 internal auditors. Right now we don't have any, and we could use 2. We have a large budget, $450 million budget. It is a complicated town, and our internal auditor is critical to financial management practices and allowing taxpayers to be confident in our practices. There should be no outside interference in our audit function at all.
Yeah, I think everybody agrees on the need to audit and look after all these things. We have to also make sure that things don't get political with these audits, and certainly we saw something in 2017 here along those lines, and under a Camillo administration that would absolutely not happen, and I don't think there's that much disagreement on the need to do all these audits.
I'm glad to hear that we're in agreement that there should be no political interference with any audit function.
Okay, next.
Yes, and the state's attorney would agree with me from 2017 in a letter.
Next question, Mr. Camillo, excuse me, you're first to respond. Are you satisfied with the process for selecting and prioritizing capital improvements?
Yes, but I would say that I would go in a different direction. I think we all have our styles and our agendas that we'd like to get see enacted, and what my top 10 may not be my opponent's top 10, and Leslie's top 10. It's this was started about 2003, the CIP project process, and I think it's a good one. But I would take a fresh look at it and reprioritize those projects according to what I think the town really needs.
Ms. Oberland?
I'd like to see a more public discussion about our capital project needs and a greater engagement of our community as a whole. The schools have a capital master plan out there, and I'd like to begin that community conversation about that master plan. It is a big lift for this community, and it is talked about. It's like the elephant in the room when we talk about these kinds of things. Let's have that conversation. Let's figure out, what does our community want? What do our schools need? And it's not just the schools. We have a lot of other capital infrastructure needs, and we should be having an open dialogue about that. So there had been a process for capital improvement evaluation. I'd like to open it up and start that dialogue, have a broader-based discussion. I know that I think the League of Women Voters is actually doing a study on the capital projects. Am I correct on the process? So have that conversation with the League's input and try to figure out a better way forward.
Anything else? Okay. First to respond now will be Ms. Oberlander. Have you read the Strategic Management Energy Plan passed unanimously by the Conservation Committee and the BOS? Do you agree that the Energy Commission should have the authority to set energy standards for public buildings, new and those renovated?
I do agree that we should have an energy commission. I think that we have not had enough activity on energy conservation in our town. While I think that that is something that under my leadership we will get to, leaders change. And these are long-term projects and they're long-term benefits. And the Energy Commission, being an independent entity, will ensure that as leaders change, those kinds of goals are protected. And we all benefit from energy conservation services. We benefit both environmentally, which is important, and we benefit economically. So yes, I'm very supportive of the Energy Commission.
Yeah, and I would agree. And certainly I think we've started to do that here in town, but we have a lot of work to do. We're starting to see LED lights in many of the buildings, not all of them. I would make sure there's sensor lights in all of them, but also on a bigger level. I'd like to start seeing solar panels on public buildings wherever it's possible. I've already reached out to people, Democrats and Republicans, who said they would be on that sustainability committee. That would be a committee in action that would work. And it would be, again, a big part of a Camillo administration, so that a year from now they would say, okay, we could see some tangible things that are being done, because again, we should be, I think, farther along, but we have started it, which is a good thing, but we'll pick up the pace.
I think the proposal is for an independent energy commission and not a committee as well. So I support the commission because that will last beyond our own committees.
The committee will still be there, though.
Next question. Mr. Camillo, how does your academic experience and work experience qualify you for CEO of Greenwich?
Thank you. Well, being a lifelong resident here, I ended up, I went to school late in life. So when I was 19, I started a couple small businesses. I know what it's like to get up in the morning and work. I know what it's like to deal with people. I know what it's like to not be able to take vacations. I know what it's like to struggle. and I went to school later on in life and got a couple of degrees. But I've been involved in real estate, in transactional, sales, operational ends of it for over 20 years, and been in banking, and even taught history. Not here, but I did teach. So I know people. And I know my background in 11 years in Hartford. So when mayors and first selectmen get seated, they're given a list of a liaison list for state departments and agencies. Who to call? I don't need that list. They're all on my phone. I know them all. They're friends, even when we don't agree. I know them. I could hit the ground running on day one, and my professional background and my personal experiences will aid the town in that.
Ms. Oberlander?
Thank you. I think the question was, how does your work and personal experience lead you to this?
How does your academic experience and work experience?
Okay. So academically, I'm a lawyer by training, as I said earlier. My work experience, I've spent 2 decades in municipal government in New York City and here in Greenwich, 10 years as an elected official in Greenwich. As a lawyer, I worked on all of the issues that I mentioned before, contract negotiation, legal issues, real estate, transportation, environmental issues. My personal experience as well, Mr. Camillo referred to his background. My father was a doctor, OBGYN, he worked all the time. My mother was a school teacher. We grew up with the philosophy of work, actually. If anything was wrong, work harder. If you didn't get a good grade, work harder. If the girl next door to you was mean, work harder. Work harder was, in addition to giving back to your community, was the ethic in our house. Comes in really handy as a law firm associate, and on the campaign trail, I will tell you, the work harder motif. I am a hard worker. I have the legal background. I have the BET background. I am familiar with the budget, the departments, our operations, and what we need to move ourselves forward.
Well, thank you. The one thing I pride myself in is I'll never be outworked. Why? Because I was raised by Al Camillo, a Marine Corps drill instructor, who made sure that I would never be outworked.
I'm not going to say I'm going to raise your challenge, but I might raise your challenge.
All right, next question. Ms. Oberlander, your turn to be first. How would you go about modernizing town government in Greenwich, and what would you consider the definition of modernizing to be?
Greenwich is a fantastic community. We like to think of ourselves as a small town, and we've kept our government largely, in that mode. We need a professional, modern-day government complete with technology. Some of the things that I've been able to do on the BET has started to move us forward on that. Whereas cybersecurity defense is the one that immediately comes to mind. The town was not having a coordinated plan for cybersecurity defense. On the BET, we took the reins on that, and we've called together a task force. We've funded it, and we're starting to work on issues. Now, it's understandable, really, because this was not an issue 10 years ago the way it is now. Things change, and we need to be able to change with it. In order to do that, we need to have the best practices. We need to improve our technology. We need to have an active management. We need to update the way we're doing things. I do have a lot of familiarity with the departments, and there are individual departments that I might take a look at that haven't been evaluated in 20 years or more. Our services and our needs are different now, and we need to bring everything up to the present day and move our government forward to match our current day challenges.
Mr. Camillo?
Thank you. As I said earlier, I would look at every department, and I promise you a few will be restructured. Some I think are run very, very well, but some I think are in need of some help and some restructuring. And certainly, the example we've mentioned before of the parking department may be one where actually you go in a totally different direction. But I also want to do more with less, and certainly. I met with a couple of the union members and one of the bargaining unions, and they were saying, we agree with you, Mr. Camillo, on your P3s and all that stuff, but We just worry that, if you're worried about headcount all the time and you're giving us more work by, maybe accepting a facility, and they're right. They're right. When we accept things, we have to make sure that there's a maintenance fund for them too. So I certainly would look at every single department and see where we can do more with less, but certainly you don't want to have it, put in jeopardy the services that the town's really used to and pays for.
Yes. So as BET chair, one of the most important goals was to keep taxes low, and that's what we did. The Democrats had the lowest rate of increase in a long time, over a decade of the prior rule. That is critically important. So I agree with Mr. Camillo. We need to be very, very careful about how we manage our headcount as well as how we provide services. And that's why we need to modernize, because there are services that we're not providing. We used to have a traffic engineer and a traffic analyst, and we no longer have that. We need to make sure that we have appropriate traffic planning. We need to be ahead of the curve, not behind the curve. We need to do something with our economic development, something that has not come up yet today. We need to figure out how we're going to do economic development for the town. I'd like to have a business office, someone who could walk businesses through our processes, to give a handout to a hand like this, a handout to businesses when they come through the town, and how to settle here. Strategic planning, we're not doing that either. There are a lot of places where the town has not kept up with current service needs, so we do need to take a careful look at the way we're providing services, what kinds of services we're providing. At the same time, I'm completely committed to keeping our taxes low.
Well, I thank you and your colleagues for your work last year for getting a 0% increase. I also want to thank the Republicans for putting in place the policy switching over to the health care, to the state plan, that saved us $12 million, that allowed you to do that. So thank you for all working together.
You're welcome. There are lots of pressures on the town budget, actually. It's not just the healthcare expenses. There are the pension expenses and escalations in contract, a number of expenses. Actually, since I have such a firm knowledge of the budget, I'll be able to work more closely with it as we start off.
All right, next question. You touched on it briefly, but Mr. Camillo, you're first to respond. What plans do you have to attempt to bring new businesses to Greenwich?
Sure, thank you. Certainly, Greenwich has never had that problem before, right? It's not like the state or Stanford that has to build these tax expenditures to lure businesses in there. We've always sold ourselves. But right now things are, I think, if you look at Greenwich Avenue, 3 years ago we had 24 vacancies on the avenue. Today we have 12. So it's going in the right direction. And that is the private market. But we can, in government, we can make it more attractive, right? Don't throw impediments out there and obstacles, get out of the way sometimes, but also enhance things. And certainly, we don't get help from Hartford all the time. I mean, unfortunately, I don't want to be political, but you know what's going on every single year, especially the last 10 years in Hartford. The $10,000 SALT deduction, now we're getting it from D.C. last year. That didn't help. So it's really going to be left to us. How do we make the best town in the state of Connecticut, and in my opinion, the country, how do you make it even better? And that's why you have to think outside the box. Do you look to the back country where people, when I was growing up, everybody wanted to live in the back country. Now they want to come in to the town because you want to walk to everything. You want the convenience. How do you make that better? Well, maybe you start looking at satellite business districts in the back country, like maybe Greenfield Hills and Fairfield, a small little area there. It doesn't have to be an ugly commercial building. Look at Nantucket. They have They have houses there with shingles. You wouldn't even know it's a pharmacy. But people don't have to go in far, 20 minutes into town. You have to think outside the box for people to come here. Your downtown business area, just want to enhance it as much as you can. But it is going in the right direction. And certainly, you don't want to throw any impediments there and any obstacles for recruitment and retention.
Ms. Oberlander?
Yes, so the economy is a critical part of my platform. People are concerned about their property values, and we want to have a local economy that thrives, actually. The first thing that I'm going to do is business retention. My husband's had a business in Old Greenwich for 25 years, and in that time period, not once has he been reached out to by the town to say, how's it going? That's not going to happen under my administration. I've already started reaching out to businesses to find out how they're doing, what they need, how do we keep them here? Because once we've lost them, you can't get them back so easily. If they're ready to move, you're behind the curve. I want to be ahead of the curve and everything. I agree with my opponent. We should be best in class, the best town, not just in Fairfield County and the state of Connecticut, but in the country. But we need to up our game. We need to have an economic development plan. This was part of the platform 2 years ago. There's a not-for-profit, CERC, that helps communities do that. It's a Connecticut not-for-profit. They will help us develop a Greenwich-specific economic development plan that will allow us to go out and do business attraction in addition to business retention, not with a strategic analysis and a strategic orientation. Lots of other ideas on the economy as well. Placemaking designations, like I said before, the cultural corridor, artisanal alley. Got lots of ideas on that. I agree with Mr. Camillo. We should be working on backcountry and doing economic development in backcountry. When I worked at the Alliance for Downtown New York, the Business Improvement District in Lower Manhattan, I worked there after 9/11, rebuilding Lower Manhattan. There were a lot of economic development ideas that we put into place to help revitalize Lower Manhattan. It is so critical. Companies want vital environments for their workers. Workers want to come to environments that are vital. I'm not talking about changing the character. We love the character. I'm talking about trying to figure out how do we bring vitality back to our town.
When I speak to friends and constituents who own businesses that I've left and residents, it's almost always because of the policies of the state of Connecticut, not the policies of the town of Greenwich. That doesn't mean that we can't, do better. The great Vince Lombardi once said, you strive for perfection and you chase it relentlessly. You're never going to catch it, but along the way you may attain excellence. And that's how I would approach government here. We are here. We are the best in the state, but we're not where we want. We want to be even better than that. But I just want to be clear, when people are leaving, they're not leaving because of Greenwich, they're leaving because of Connecticut.
Did you have something else to add? Yes, go ahead.
I did, but I just lost it for a second. We do need to be best in class here, and we need to work with Hartford. It is in Hartford's interest and the state's interest for Greenwich to succeed and to be the best. And I will be affirmatively reaching out to our elected representatives on both sides of the aisle, including the governor, to make sure that Greenwich gets the representation that we need and the support that we need. It's a reciprocal relationship. They need us to succeed, and we need their help to succeed as well.
Okay. Next question, Ms. Oberlander, you're first to respond. How will you mediate any disputes between the harbor master and the harbor commission?
I have great respect for both entities. The harbor master works extraordinarily hard, and the Harbor Management Commission has been incredibly successful in passing a plan, and as regarding specific disputes, as they come up, I will look at the facts of each and talk to each group of individuals. I thank all of them. This has been a difficult path, and we do have a harbor management plan, so I'm really appreciative for the work that was done throughout the town to adopt that.
I too want to thank the commission for all the work they've done, and certainly the harbor master, who I know very, very well, who's got great knowledge of the water here in town and all the regulations. Has there been some friction? Yes, there has. But that's what leadership is for. Leadership has to address that. Maybe my background as a high school coach, or a business person, or being a chairman of many boards and committees, both here and in Hartford, will really allow me to and will make me bring them together. And if somebody can't get along, and if somebody, one of the powers of the first selectman is the power to appoint and renominate. And if the people aren't getting along, and they just are not doing the job on some committee or commission, and there's just a stalemate there, if they won't come together, then that's where leadership comes in, and you have to make sure that people are in place that will work together. Because you do want to take advantage of a person that has a lot of knowledge there, and I'm not taking sides on the Harbor Commission and the issues with Ian, but certainly there's a lot of room there, and you could really tap into somebody who has been an asset. I mean, just saved the town of Greenwich about $19,000 getting somebody to raise a wreck off of Great Captain's Island. And no one else was talking about that. So I would be supportive of them working together. In fact, I would make sure they work together as first selectman.
Right. Next question, Mr. Camillo. You're first. There are a couple of questions, and you've touched on them a little bit, but the question relate to your views of long-term financing in the town. Some people are indicating it's a wonderful thing, some not so much. So, your views on
thank you. That is
financing.
a big point of disagreement between my opponent and I. She already voted on record to change the debt policy in town. It wasn't implemented because by charter you need a 7th vote. 83% of our debt is paid off within 5 years. 92% is paid off within 10 years. Under my administration, that will not change. That doesn't mean that, if I look at a particular project and it makes sense to go longer, that's fine. That's what leadership is. You have to look at each project. But you never, ever, ever want to abandon what has worked so well in Greenwich since the 1930s. If you go to long-term debt as a policy, it's going to result in more spending and more taxes. Don't take it from me. Look at other towns. Look at Hartford, Connecticut. 120 years ago, it was the wealthiest city in the country. Look at today. It's a disaster. Absolute disaster. I will not, under a Camillo administration, I would never, ever advocate for that. But I would also be open-minded. I would keep the ratios I just talked about, but also look to other ways to get things done, but not change to long-term debt.
Ms. Oberlin.
Thank you. Yes, first of all, we already have long-term debt. We use long-term financing for our Nathaniel Witherell Nursing Home. We use it for our sewers. We used it to purchase property. So it's already in play. The question is, I'm going to go back to my old home analogy. The question really should be, what are our needs? What infrastructure does this community need? Are we investing enough? How are we protecting our seniors, our children, our residents? How are we planning for the future? You can just take a look at some of the examples recently. Let's look at the bleachers, right? The bleacher proposal came up several years ago. It wasn't approved because we're looking at cost first and need second. It was already at the end of their useful life. This last spring, we had to close the bleachers. A visiting parent put their foot through the bleachers, and immediately the risk manager went out, and the bleachers were closed. And now we're working backwards on an emergency basis, not planning the way we should be. Similarly, when we don't invest enough in infrastructure, we're faced with lawsuits. A ceiling tile fell from the cafeteria and hit someone on the head, and we're being sued. We need to make smart decisions. We're a big town, a complex town. We have diverse needs. Long-term financing is a mechanism to accomplish your needs. Sometimes money is actually cheaper. It's cheaper to get it done while you have the need than to delay and have to do more. If we were planning appropriately, we would be able to figure out what we need and then how to pay for it. I think the whole conversation of, we obviously disagree on the whether we should use it at all or not. There are issues that we're not addressing, and we need to figure out how do we address them, how do we pay for them. The last example I'm going to use is the Western Middle School fields, environmental remediation. We have environmental contamination throughout the town that we're just not addressing adequately. 3 years have gone by. That's an entire cohort of students that have not gotten to play on their fields because of the environmental contamination. We need to figure out how to fix those fields, and we need to do it quickly, and then we need to figure out how to pay for it. And that's the conversation that I was talking about before, about the important needs and the important priorities, and that the financing has to be part of that discussion.
I don't think you need long-term debt to fix those problems. You reprioritize, and certainly, as I said, you look at each situation and judge whether you go to longer-term financing. And yes, the examples you mentioned, certainly. But again, 92% of our debt is paid off within 10 years. You don't want to see that change. It makes it so much easier, right, to spend more when you say, well, let somebody else do it and let them pay for it down the road because money's cheap. Well, I grew up in this town, and I did not inherit debt, and I certainly am not going to pass it on to the next generation. How selfish is that? And I certainly don't advocate it.
Ms. Oberlander?
Leadership is challenging and difficult, and sometimes you have to make difficult suggestions like paying for our fields. That'll be a question for the taxpayers. Do they want to pay over 3 to 5 years for the cleanup of all the environmental contamination? Or do we want to have a different financing plan that will allow future residents to share in the cost of cleaning up their fields and fixing our schools and building Dorothy Hamill and all of the things that we want to have? I'm not suggesting that we fund every wish list item. What I'm suggesting is that we fund what we need, and we have those difficult conversations about what we need and how we want to fund them.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're just about out of time, so let's get into some more questions. All right, next, and sorry, anything else on that particular question?
No. Once again, I stand by what I said. You don't push off the debt to other people. You reprioritize. We'll get it done. If there's a problem there, you fix it. But you don't want to say, again, my history here is I don't want to pass off and say, well, let the future residents share in those expenses when we didn't inherit that. To me, it's a fundamental difference here, and I, again, will give you my word that would not happen under my administration.
Anything else on this question? Ladies and gentlemen, we just have a couple of minutes. Yes, go ahead.
I think it's that important that I just want to reemphasize that I want to give our children the facilities that they need in their schools to keep our town competitive and to provide them the best-in-class education that we know they deserve and we know is the foundation for the future. And that may involve some difficult conversations. The vote will come up, it will go to the BET, and it will go to the RTM, but it certainly won't be because I will have reprioritized and further delayed the conversation about what our town needs.
Anything else?
Yeah, with all due respect, I'm not talking about further delaying anything. Not at all. In fact,
ladies and gentlemen, let's listen to both people.
In
Thank
fact,
you.
if we're taught you keep bringing up the schools. Well, I went here. I went to public schools. I taught in public schools. I see lots of teachers here tonight who are very supportive of me. The main thing is you want good education, good teachers, right? Great teachers, curriculum. Buildings don't teach you. Yes, you do want great buildings, but that's secondary to the actual education itself. And you could ask any teacher and they'll tell you that.
All right, that brings us to the time for closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes, and I want to give the timers the opportunity to reset your stopwatches. Let me know when you're ready. Okay, Mr. Camillo, you're first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you again tonight for coming here, and thank my opponent for a good spirited debate. With a healthy respect for our past, I come also with a bold vision for our future. That vision includes, as I said before, reforming the way we finance our projects here in town. It's refurbishing and repurposing long dormant and underused assets. I will form a properties commission to look at these things, and I will look at Democrats and Republicans to sit on that, just like I've done in Hartford, reaching across the aisle to get dozens of laws passed in my 11 years. I will also look at that community enhancement and sustainability committee to make Greenwich, again, environmentally, really the town that everybody else looks to, just like I did in 1989 with some competitors when we formed Greenwich Recycling to make it the best company and make Greenwich the envy of the rest of the state with a company that set the standard. God bless you. I would also transform the way the Board of Selectmen reacts with you, the citizens. Every other meeting would be held at night and an alternating basis around the town, so that those who work during the day, right, could attend and address and engage their government at night, all over town. One in the morning and then the next time at night. I would also send out an e-blast at the end of each week detailing what transpired that week in town government and what's ahead in the following week. Just like I've done every single week for the last 11 years in Hartford. We can do this. We must do this. We'll do it together. As our 16th president said, without public sentiment, nothing can succeed. With it, nothing can fail. Thank you, God bless, and I'll see you out around town.
Ms. Oberlander, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank the League, my family and friends, and everyone for coming tonight, including my opponent. When I moved to Greenwich with my family, we were so excited. The beautiful surroundings, beaches, parks, and excellent schools made it an easy decision. My husband had his business here, and our children, now teenagers, were babies. I'd been working in New York City in law and municipal government, and that was the best training ground for what I do today. Though we weren't born here, we've put down roots and love it more every day, just like so many of you. It has been an honor to serve. As an elected official and BET chair, I'm proud of my record. Under my leadership, we kept your taxes low, lower than my Republican colleagues wanted. We prevented $1.7 million in education cuts that were also championed by the Republicans, and we performed critical strategic planning for our community, including the cyber defense I talked about for Fields and for the Nathaniel Witherall. I know all the department heads, I know their operations, and I know what we have to do to keep Greenwich moving forward. We're at an inflection point. The Greenwich name alone is no longer enough to attract new businesses and new families. We have to compete with neighboring towns and states. In particular, I want to see our local economy thrive, our schools to be the envy of Fairfield County, and our environment safeguarded. Lastly, values. I will speak out. I'll speak out for women, their access to health care and reproductive freedom, for the civil rights of marginalized communities, for a living wage, and I'll be a voice for the most vulnerable amongst us, the disabled and the elderly. I am grateful to have had the chance to serve. I believe I have the experience, vision, and values to lead Greenwich into the future. I ask for your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to remind you we have another debate coming up. We want to bring up the 2 candidates for Selectmen, but again, thank both of you for being here this evening. We sincerely appreciate your running for office and being willing to take on challenges. If you must leave, I would appreciate it if you do so quickly. Otherwise, stay seated, and we want to get right to the other debate. Thank you. I was going to say this side. Okay, the candidates are ready. All right. And again, thank you for coming this evening. It's wonderful to see such a huge turnout. Very impressive. I'm doing Fairfield in a couple of weeks. We'll see how they do. All right. We're ready for the debate on between the 2 candidates for Selectmen. To introduce them, to my immediate right is Lauren Rabin, Republican, and to her right, Democrat Sandy Litvak. Thank you both for being here. Let's get to, could we close doors maybe out there? Thank you. All right, the first one to respond will be Ms. Rabin. And the question is, how do you view your role as Selectman, and what do you expect to accomplish?
Thank you, Kay, for the question, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and our moderator and certainly the audience. It's so great to see so many people out to listen to this forum and our debate so that we can get our concepts across. So how I see my role as Selectman, it's part of a 3-person board, and first and foremost, I want to be a collaborator with the other 2 members of the board, that being the first Selectman and the other Selectman. We do have, by charter, certain responsibilities like traffic control. We nominate boards and commissions. We also act as ombudsman for the town. So some of the things that I want to try to accomplish, especially with the independent boards and commissions, is try to create a way to share best practices so that we are operating in the same direction. We will set the mission with the first selectman and the other member of the board, and then make sure that these boards and commissions are acting accordingly. I'm not sure if everyone realizes about 70% of our town employees actually do not report to the first selectman. So the concept of who we nominate and how they interact with one another is pretty important.
Mr. Lefebvre?
Yes, well, of course, I have been a selectman, the minority selectman, for the last 2 years. I think there's two roles that you play as a selectman and not the first selectman. One is that if you are of the same party, in my case, if it's Jill as the first selectman, which I certainly hope will be the case, you're largely supportive of her and you're a team. And I suspect if Lauren is a selectman and Fred was elected, she will be supportive of him. So your first one is to be supportive of the team, and we are a team running as a team. The second is, in my role, what I have done, candidly, is you sit there and you ask the tough questions. That is what your job is. It is called leadership. It is making sure that everything that is brought to you has been aired and aired publicly and aired in a way that you have the facts. One of the concerns you have, I have, is to make sure that when the Board of Selectmen acts, it acts on facts. And that's the hardest thing to get the board to do. That's something that I'm committed to.
I certainly would be supportive of the first selectman regardless of what party they were with. If they were my party or not the other person's party, I think the three of us have to behave as a team first and foremost. I don't think the community wants us to put politics first. And then I certainly agree with my opponent. Anything that comes in front of the board would be vetted with the same level of detail that I approach anything that I've done in my 35-year career as a business person.
Yeah, at bottom, you're always trying to do what's best for the town. It's pure and simple.
Okay, next question. Mr. Litvak, you're first to respond. As selectman, what special projects, if any, would you like to work on?
Well, first and foremost for me, and I ran on this platform 2 years ago, is economic development. You know, we have a slogan, think Greenwich. That's not a plan. I've argued this for the longest time now. Greenwich needs to have an economic development plan. I know how to do that. We did that at Disney. You can't have a company and you can't have a town that remains viable without an economic development plan. But more than the plan, you need to be able to execute on the plan. Because lots of people have plans. The plan is the easy part. Executing is the hard part. That is something that I have done. That is something I want to do for Greenwich. I think we are at a pivotal point. If we don't get going on this, and we haven't for the last 2 years, we are going to pay the piper someday.
Ms. Rabin?
It's great. I totally agree that we need an economic development plan, and being the incumbent selectman, I think you probably would have had an opportunity to do that over the past 2 years. So hopefully there was a little bit of a dent made in that thing that you wanted to accomplish when you first were running for first selectman. Some of the things that I'm thinking about are with respect to our schools. I'm currently on the Board of Education. We've had a revolving door of superintendents, and that has impacted the school system up and down with respect to the administration, teachers, et cetera. And what I would like to do is be, again, that ombudsman and help embrace the new superintendent and make sure that she's successful and can steer our school system into the future. I also think about all the different health issues that people are experiencing, whether they're mental health, whether people have issues with substance abuse, alcoholism. There's a lot that our seniors are struggling with. There's a lot that our youth are struggling with. I happen to be a mother of 2 children, 29 and 26, on the Board of Education. I'm also the liaison to student government, and I hear firsthand that the pressures that our students are under, and I'd really like to think about what we can be doing as a community and as a government to help people struggling with these illnesses.
I think all the things that Laura mentioned are important. There is no question about it, and they all need attention. The only thing I would add is when you say I've been on the board for 2 years and therefore hopefully we've done something on economic development. Unfortunately, no, we haven't, because we've had a first selectman who believes that having a slogan is sufficient and we don't have to have an economic development plan. Hopefully, having listened to the 2 before me, we will have an economic development plan, and hopefully I'll be able to lead that.
Anything else? All right, next question. First to respond, Ms. Raven. Are you satisfied with the nomination process for boards and commissions?
I am not saying that I'm not, sorry. It's not that I'm not satisfied. I think there's always room for improvement in any process. I actually served on a board. I was nominated then appointed to the Board of Social Services. I think that there's some issues with just getting talent, having people understand that we do have open spots on all these boards and commissions. We also have some requirements. They have to be evenly distributed, so you can't have 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats on a 7-member board, for example. So just understanding, I've even seen people change their party affiliation just so that they can get on a board or commission. It's not clear to me, as I mentioned in my previous question, if all the independent boards and commissions are actually talking to one another and sharing best practices, and how do they get together and understand what each maybe individual thing that they're governing is going through. I also am not clear on what the success criteria is. So how do we know that the folks that we've nominated are actually meeting the needs that they've been appointed for? So I would look into those types of things.
Well, the process, you start with the fact that you want to and have to attract people to do this. These are volunteer positions. No one is being paid. And so you need to incite and excite people to do this. When you ask the question, am I satisfied with the process, the answer is yes and no. I am satisfied that the Board of Selectmen does a good job of interviewing, vetting, and trying to get the best candidates for each job. What I'm not satisfied with is that the process doesn't end there. And I know I will upset some people with this, but from there, it goes to the RTM. And first of all, there is no reason, if you trust the board, why it has to have 2 votes for a volunteer position. Second of all, we have had people turned down because they got caught in a political maelstrom after the Board of Selectmen has spent a lot of time selecting these people and making sure that they were the best people for the job. One of the problems in Greenwich government, and I come to Greenwich government very late, as everybody knows, is we are so diffused that it's hard to fix responsibility. And responsibility is important. So if the Board of Selectmen selects candidates for volunteer positions on boards, the responsibility ought to end there. So in my perfect world, to answer the question that you've asked, we would pick the people. If we pick the wrong people, you'd elect new selectmen. It's very simple.
I disagree that it should only live with the Board of Selectmen. We're 3 people in a community of 60,000. I think there is healthy sort of regard for getting more people into the process. Whether it's as many as it is within the RTM, maybe there's a restructuring in the appointments committee, but I don't think 3 people can make the decision in this particular regard, because there's hundreds of people that are getting appointed and being reappointed that it should be a little bit broader than 3 people out of 60,000.
I would only add that there's not a plethora of people who are standing in line for these positions. I mean, if you think you're going to be standing there saying, which of these 10 people do I pick, you're not.
All right, next question, and Mr. Litvak, you're first to respond. There are a couple of questions that relate to funding for various things. Mentioned in these questions would you support funding for more playing fields in town? Would you support renovation of the skating rink, of the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center? So town facilities of that sort and how to fund them is the gist of the question.
Look, they're all worthy causes. I mean, it is quite obvious you can't do everything at once. So the key is to prioritize. And that's a community decision. You know, Lauren talks about having the community more involved, and I agree, she's right. That's a community decision. We have to decide of these things, since they were talking earlier about schools, we have schools that are 60 and 70 years old. You may not want to pass on the debt to your children or grandchildren. You're passing on 70-year-old schools. You think that's the right answer? So let's talk about prioritizing. Are the playing fields important? You bet. Are the schools important? You bet. Is Dorothy Hamill Rink important? Yeah, maybe. And maybe you think it's more important. Then let's prioritize. Let's have a discussion, and let's decide what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. You know, we've talked about this, and we keep saying, oh, we haven't done that yet. We've got to do this. We've had 12 years of one administration, 18 years almost of one party rule in this town. If these things haven't been done, if there is no plan, who's responsible? I think you know. They haven't done it. We want to do it. Let us do it.
Ms. Rabin?
So definitely we need to be improving our infrastructure, and I think you talked specifically about Fields and Dorothy Hamill, and I think there was a third one. I agree, we totally need to prioritize. Some of these projects have been in need of improvement longer than others. I agree with community involvement. I also agree with my running mate's proposal on public-private partnerships where they make sense. And yeah, that's it.
The key, and you know it because you sit on the Board of Education, is we have got to get these schools up to par. It may well be, as was said earlier, that teachers are the most important element. That is true. But 70-year-old schools that aren't complicit and compliant with ADA, 70-year-old schools that don't have all the modern technology, people aren't going to move to a town that doesn't have it. It's just that simple when they can go, as Jill said, just down the line a little bit and be in Darien or be in Westport and have those facilities. So we've got to face up to it.
Thank you for the addition, because you remind me what my train of thought was. Certainly, we as the board did put together a master facilities plan, and we prioritized ADA accessibility. It's the law. We also prioritized security. And one of the things that I've been talking about is we can have all the funds, we can have all the needs, but we are dealing with schools, and children are in these schools. So we have a finite time when we could actually execute. So we have to take that into consideration. Most improvements, if you don't close the school down totally, is done over the summer. So that has to be factored into the decision. We definitely have funds for capital improvement that are unspent because we're not executing on them. So there's no need to borrow money, have it sit there, and not get executed on.
Okay, next question. Ms. Rabin, you're the first to respond. Are we in the town doing enough for affirmative action?
Being a woman in 35 years working in high technology, a male-dominated industry, I think we could always be doing more for affirmative action, whether it's on gender, whether it's on ability, whether it's on race, you know, you name it. There's always room for improvement.
I agree. I think we're doing an okay job. We can do better. We definitely can do better. And I would certainly work to make sure that happens.
Okay, next question. Mr. LeFac, you're first to respond. How would you propose to protect the town's fiscal interests in the property at the train station?
Ah, the train station, yes. So, let me talk for a couple of minutes about the train station. First of all, it was said that the Board of Selectmen knew about this, so it sure as heck wasn't done secretly. That is a bit of an overstatement, to be kind. The fact is, this was run by the first Selectman. The fact is that when I was told about it, and I suggested that we go hire competent people who can advise as to what to do here, that was totally ignored. And instead what was done is we entered into a deal, and by the way, this is a matter of public record. I voted against the municipal improvement. I did so saying that I favored a project there. And I would even favor what you call P3. I just call it a public-private partnership. I guess 3P is easier. I would favor that. I oppose this because it was not a public-private partnership. This was, and I respectfully submit, anyone in business who looked at this would know this. This was a move by the developer to maximize his profits, and by the way, there is nothing wrong with that. If I were in his shoes, I would try to do the same, but at the expense of the town. We were not partners. He is going to get the benefit of increasing the rent at every one of those buildings back there, at every one of those stores on the avenue, of all of that movie theater. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars. And we were going to get, on a good day, $10 million. That's not a partnership. I would like to be his partner. I'd like the town to be his partner. We were not his partner. We were not his partner. So to answer the question that was put precisely, what would I do? I would do two things. One, I get the right expertise and the right people. I am a lawyer. I know nothing about this. This is an area of law that I know nothing about. So you go and you get the right people, and you get their advice. And I know what you would learn is there's a bargain to be made. And when you're doing negotiations, and I did this at Disney for more than a decade, the first thing you do is you got to realize, what does the other guy need? What does he want? What are his motivations? How do you deal with that so as to maximize your position? The truth, in this negotiation, we were amateurs. Next time around, we won't be.
Ms. Rabin?
So if you look at the train station, and we're talking about schools that are old, that's definitely a facility that is in need of improvement. It's up for its useful life. I do agree that the devil will be in the details in terms of the negotiation. I agree with my running mate. Let's decouple improving the train station, improving the movie theater, and there is a public benefit. There was a park that's being proposed. We do want to connect Greenwich Avenue to the bottom of the avenue, to the Bruce Museum expansion. If we can do anything on the waterfront, it just makes sense to improve that all, and I agree that we would get the community input. I know there's drawings that have been made, and some people like them, some people don't like them, but in terms of the deal and the negotiation, of course, we're going to have to do what's best for the town, protect the taxpayer dollar. I definitely applaud what Ashforth has been doing, and I agree, they're in business and they want to make a profit, and I totally want our, not the word rights, what we need protected as well.
This, I don't disagree with anything you said, except this is an example, and it really is. It is an example of the absence of leadership and the absence of transparency. People who knew what they were doing, who went out and got the right advice, never would have brought that forward that way. There is a deal to be made. I too agree that anything we can do to improve the area down there and make a good deal for the town is what we should be doing. There was no transparency, and there was not the right kind of leadership. And that's the problem, and that's what we're going to fix.
I do have one more. I was at the Board of Selectmen meeting when you did not vote for the municipal improvement. I started to attend Board of Selectmen meetings. It's what I did before I got on the RTM. I started to attend meetings. It's what I did before I got on the Board of Social Services. I attended meetings before I got on the Board of Ed, so I'm doing it for the Board of Selectmen. And when I am on the Board of Selectmen, I will be part of the three-person board. There won't be something that I am not a part of. I listen to the he said, she said, transparent, in front of doors, behind closed doors. That's not how I behave. I intend to be an integral part of the three-person Board of Selectmen.
Next question, Ms. Rabin, you're first to respond. What do you feel is the most urgent environmental issue in town?
I would say our fields that need remediation is the most urgent environmental issue. And I know some of the questions for the first Selectmen debate centered around that. There are other factors. It's not just the finances. We're dealing with state regulations, deep, and federal regulations. So I think that's really important because it is a shame that a lot of our children have not been able to play on the fields. The other environmental thing that I care about, being on the Board of Education, is waste. We are a wasteful society. I'm very disappointed in how we do not take the personal responsibility to reduce, reuse, and recycle. So on the Board of Education, what we're trying to do is we made a vote to get rid of the styrofoam trays, and now we're just trying to consider what we can do for an alternative. So I think just waste is another important thing that we should address.
Well, I do agree that the fields are exceedingly important, and to come back to something that was said earlier, the fact is that the Western Middle School has been closed for 3 years. A whole class has missed that. So you would say to yourself, okay, well, what's the plan to fix that? What's the plan to remedy that? And what you would learn is there is no plan. There is no plan. Now, this didn't happen overnight. This wasn't a surprise. Oh, all of a sudden this morning the field was closed. It's been closed. So you've got to not just have a plan, which we don't, but you've got to be able to execute on the plan, and that is what's pivotal. To turn to the points that Laura made, I agree there are things we can be doing. She mentioned styrofoam trays. That's fine. Why isn't there solar? Why isn't there more solar energy on our town buildings? Where are the charging stations? We're going to have, and we have more and more electric cars. We're going to have autonomous cars. What's the plan? Traffic is bad enough. We don't have a traffic engineer. What's the plan? And the answer? There is no plan. And that's why Jill and I are running, because you have to have a plan, and you have to have the ability, the experience to execute on it.
All right, next question. Mr. Litvak, you're the first to respond. You both touched briefly on public-private partnerships, but the questioner would like to know how you're going to evaluate public-private partnerships. So if you have something to add on this general topic.
Well, I'm going to give a generic answer because the answer is the proverbial "it depends." But the generic answer is you're going to evaluate them, as I just said a moment ago when talking about the train station. Is it fair? At the end of the day, it's got to be fair. And fair for the town means making sure that our interests are protected. So if we can do public-private partnerships where they're really partnerships, I mean, let's focus on what partnership means. It doesn't mean a handout, and it doesn't mean a wave. it means a partnership. But if they're a real partnership, negotiated by people who have the expertise and the experience to do that, I would support them.
Ms. Rabin?
I'm in agreement. It depends on the specific thing that we're looking at to get private funds for, and definitely need to protect the town's interest. We also need to think about the long-term expenses. I think my running mate expressed things about maintenance. I remember when somebody wealthy in town put up the white signs and took out the green ones, and everyone was worried, well, how are we going to maintain them? And they don't really look that great. So that was one thing we probably didn't want to accept the money to improve the way signs are in some of the streets. But I totally agree. We need to do everything individually, make sure that we're protecting the interests of the town.
Okay, next question. Ms. Rabin, you're first. Excuse me. If elected, after the completion of this term, what do you hope will be your greatest accomplishment?
What I hope my greatest accomplishment will be is that the community feels that they had a voice, that they were heard, that they participated in government, that we made decisions that were in their best interests, and that we are leaving our community in a better place than when we inherited it. So 2 years from now, I don't want to be talking about things that folks were bringing up 2 years before.
Well, I would hope at the end of 2 years that you could look at two things. One, that there are plans in place to deal with the economic issues, the environmental issues, and the educational issues, and that steps have been taken to move down the line, because these problems are not going to be solved in our next term, whether it's Lauren or me. It's not going to all be solved in 2 years. What's important is that we start, and that's what we haven't done.
Okay, Ms. Litvak, your first answer to this question. What are your top 3 salient skills and top 3 reasons why one should vote for you?
There's probably nothing more difficult than sitting and talking about what your skills are or why people. As many of you know, I never ran for office until 2 years ago. It was not part of my life plan. It is not part of my life plan to do it again. So this is very hard. But the answer to your question is, I bring to the table 2 or 3 skills that I believe are unique for this job and this town. Number 1, which is not unique, I am a lawyer. That's not unique. You have a lot of them. But I've practiced a long time. I've led major law firms. I have advised major companies. Number 2, I've been in government. I've been in this town government in Greenwich the last 2 years. I've been in the federal government as Assistant Attorney General. Number 3, I was at the Walt Disney Company. I held an important position. I had thousands of people reporting to me, and I had negotiated a variety of business development type deals. Those are skills that I think are important to Greenwich and that I bring to the town. And if the town thinks those are important skills, if the town thinks those are useful skills, if the town thinks those are skills which will advance the town, then people will vote for me. And if they don't, they won't.
Ms. Rabin?
So some of my skills, I think I mentioned I've worked 35 years in high technology, and we talked about modernizing government, making it more efficient, and I've got experience in technology in order to do that. I've talked a little bit about my platform, that it's not just about putting in new software. I've been in departments where you just, dump in some new software and nothing changes, because there's a whole change management component to using technology, so I can apply that experience to the role. I also went through the Greenwich Public Schools. My children went through the Greenwich Public Schools, so I'm very much aware of what the schools need from being a student, from being a parent, and being a Board of Education member. And our schools are a critical component to attracting new families to the town. I also have the right demeanor. I'm calm, I'm consistent. I'm committed, and I get along with everyone across the aisle. It doesn't matter who you are, and I can figure out a way to work with you. I could figure out a way to work for you, and I think that's really critical on a 3-person board.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add one thought. I respect others. I don't always agree with others, and I don't always get along with everybody. And if everybody does get along all the time, that is rather unusual. I would be rather skeptical. But what I do bring is I bring respect, and I bring leadership, and I bring experience. That's what I offer.
All right, next question, Ms. Rabin. Do you have any plans for addressing climate change issues here in Greenwich as a town that is on the water?
So I would work with, so definitely we need to address climate change. The weather was crazy, going door to door less than a week ago, I was sweating, and then, 2 days later, I was freezing. So there's definitely something happening with our climate. I agree with that. And there are so many, we have commissions within Town Hall, but there's also a lot of grassroots organizations. Fred and I were lucky to meet with a bunch of people a couple of weeks ago. And what I believe is, first we have to create a mission. What is it that we're going to try to accomplish? Create some tangible goals so that we know that we accomplished it. And as I mentioned with these independent boards and commissions, just make sure that we're all moving in the same direction, and we can work smarter together than work individually and not necessarily accomplish the same things. We have so many great volunteers, so many great ideas. It's just putting together, to use Sandy's term, the plan, and I think that we can definitely do that.
I agree with everything that's been said. I would just go back a quarter of a step and say, the first thing you have to do is we have to recognize, which this group does, but our country doesn't, is that there is climate change. It is not a Chinese hoax. There is climate change, and we do have to deal with it. And that emanates almost from the federal government to the state government and down to us, because we are not, no matter what we think, an island. We can deal with what we have here, but we are impacted by the state, we're impacted by the country, and if there are no environmental controls elsewhere, what we do will be swimming upstream, to make a bad pun. So I agree with everything Laura says. We have got to address these things, but the fact is we've also got to make sure and do whatever we can as individuals to make sure that our governments, state and federal, recognize climate change is real, environmental change is important, and restrictions and things that are being removed have an impact on us every single day.
Go ahead.
And to add to that, I think a very key component is personal responsibility. What we do individually matters as well. Government definitely has their role in this, but personal responsibility, personal accountability definitely plays a role.
Okay, next, Mr. Litvak, I'm going to ask this question of each of you. Is there an issue that hasn't been raised this evening that you would like to address with your own views as well as those of your opponent? And then I'll ask the same question of your opponent.
Is this to me?
It's to you, yes. Mm-hmm.
You pretty much covered the waterfront with all the questions that have been raised. I guess I'm debating, but I'm going to. I have been out there publicly, so I might as well say it here too. A good part of this is all about leadership. I've used that word. I will continue to use it because that is what, as far as I am concerned, government is about. And I have been critical of our town leaders, of people in our legislature and otherwise, who have failed to lead, whether it's in speaking out about climate change whether it's speaking about affirmative action, whether it's speaking out about children being put in cages. Leadership, in my judgment, requires those of us who purport to be leaders to stand up and speak out. I know this gets terribly political, but this is political. It shouldn't be, but the fact is, it is. And people have got to learn to put party aside and brand things for what they are. And when something is wrong, you can stand up and say, I'm a Democrat, but I don't support that. I'm a Republican, and I find that repugnant. And that's what we are not doing. And that is an issue in this town. Are we going to stand up as a town and say, much of what comes out of Washington is totally inconsistent with our values here in Greenwich, Connecticut, and we don't support it, we don't like it, we find it repugnant, and we don't want it in our town. And if we don't do that, we're going to have the same kind of divisive language in this town that we have in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere in this country. That would be a very sad fact.
Ms. Rabin? Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have much time left. Let's please. Ms. Rabin, do you have comments on the leadership issue, or do you want to move to something else that we haven't touched on?
Definitely leadership is critical. Leadership is also about uniting the community, not dividing them. And in order to be a leader...
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
People need to want to follow you. So proclaiming yourself a leader without followers doesn't make anyone a leader. Some of the issues that we didn't talk about that I think are critical, the local issues, we might have touched on it a teensy, is the traffic in town. As I've gone door to door, that has come up time and time again. We have more cars than we have people in the town of Greenwich. Some of us went to the Byram Neighborhood Association this week and learned how awful it is there. And the police officer that spoke talked about how many citations that we've had this year. To date, over 6,000, and it's only October. Last year, we had about 5,000. We've got speeding, we've got folks that don't put their blinkers on, and we're trying to be an age-friendly community, and it's very hard to get around town when you've got so many drivers that are either speeding or just making bad decisions. So I think that's a critical thing that we have to address as a Board of Selectmen. And then in terms of aging in place, we have a population in our town that's aging. 91% want to stay here, but 46% are going to leave. So we need to think about the folks that have worked hard and tirelessly and raised their children and have lived here for 40 plus years. How do we make the community accessible for them, affordable for them, so that they can age in place? I want to retire here in Greenwich as well.
Those are absolutely important issues. I would just add on the traffic, because I thought it had been discussed. The reason I didn't mention it, but maybe it wasn't. But at a minimum, we used to have a traffic engineer. We used to have an ability to make a traffic plan. And again, it has only gotten worse. And so I completely agree that that is something that ought to get attention, and ought to get attention early on.
Okay, the time has come for closing statements. So again, if the timers can reset, you will each have 2 minutes. And Ms. Rabin, you're the first.
Thank you so much. So I want to apply my experience and my energy and my enthusiasm, for the job of selectmen. And I'm going to make sure that our community gets the benefit of a 3-member board that's committed, available, present, and not just being there sometime, but being there all the time. You deserve this. I haven't told a lot of people this, it's going to get on TV. I left my job to focus on the role of being selectman. And I'm going to work to improve our schools, the costs of our services, and the ways that our independent boards and commissions govern to ensure we're all supporting a common mission. I'll be transparent and openly communicate and solicit feedback from every single one of the people in our community, and I will take ownership of issues. I'll partner with our state and federal representatives to ensure our voices are heard in Hartford and in Washington, D.C. Greenwich is one of the last great municipalities in our state, and are we better off than we were 2 years ago? We have the foundation, and together we can move forward and make it better. I will personally be accountable to innovate and offer a fresh perspective, and I ask for your vote on November 5th.
Mr. Litvak, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, our opponents have touted the line that they are, quote, from Greenwich, for Greenwich. A lot of people have told me, and I agree, that that's kind of offensive. It suggests that if you weren't born here, and I sure wasn't, that you're not for Greenwich or don't have the same intensity for Greenwich. And that's just not true. That is absolutely not true. Not only is it not true, it detracts from what is the real issue. Because electing a first selectman and electing a selectman isn't about attendance. You don't get an A because you've shown up for 40 years. You get an A because you have leadership, because you bring something to the town that's unique. Jill and I teamed up because we thought that the two of us together brought unique and complementary skills. We're both lawyers with different kinds of practices. She's been steeped in the town for years at the RTM and the BET and been totally involved. I have not. I've spent 2 years as a selectman. It's been terrific. I've learned a lot about the town, which I certainly did not know. But what I brought was a different kind of experience. I brought a corporate experience. I brought a Washington, D.C. experience. And together, I think we offer something that this town has not had. That's what we want to present. We think we offer that leadership. I thank you for your attention. I thank you immensely for being here tonight. We would like your vote. Thank you.
Let me just extend a word of thanks to the candidates. You are fortunate in this town to have people willing to serve, and especially appreciate all of you who showed up tonight to listen to an interesting, civil, courteous debate. Thank you all very much.